Hey guys, Kev here. I'm pissed off because this pencil neck propaganda pushing punk, Stephen Colbert, is out there saying that all Republicans and NRA members are complicit in these mass shootings. The reality couldn't be further from the truth. Recently, we saw a masked madman, leftist SJW atheist, enter a church and kill dozens of people. Meanwhile, he was taken out by a right-wing conservative with a concealed carry permit. But the media immediately jumps to gun control, and that's what this video is about showing the facts to defeat the media propaganda. See, this mass shooting, just like many other mass shootings, just like all mass shootings, was not representative to the actual facts, or at least the media portrayal was not representative to the actual facts. Just like we saw the media bury the other church shooting in Tennessee, where a black nationalist stormed to a church and shot dozens of people, we see that they are trying to bury certain elements of this story. And this goes on and on. But the fact is that none of the mass shooting narratives we hear from the media reflect the actual facts about mass shootings. See, the majority of mass shootings are perpetrated by African Americans. This is a long stretch from the left, this media rendition that will have you believe that all mass shootings are committed by young white males who lean Republican, which is absolutely BS. In fact, there are about 350 mass shootings a year in America, and those are shootings where 3 or more people are shot. The majority of those happen in Democrat-controlled inner cities. Now, I wanted to get the facts on guns and gun control so I could give you a video, because the left is calling for sensible gun control, like they always do after every mass shooting. But they cannot tell you what they mean by sensible gun control, because sensible gun control is never sensible. And we've seen what they want. They want confiscation. They want to make all semi-automatic firearms illegal. They want to make it harder for law-abiding people to go out and buy a firearm. But the facts completely contradict their claims that justify these laws. And I want to talk about when I went to search for these facts. I've said this before, that companies like Google and Yahoo and even the social medias, they try to censor certain articles. But beyond that, I realized that Google completely buried all facts on gun control and gun violence. See, I did a search on gun violence in America. And then I did a search on gun crime by race, by demographics, by age. And all these searches, the first few pages were flooded with left-wing propaganda rags. Companies like Fox, with articles that said stuff like, black victims are terrorized by gun crime. Now, this is true. There are more black victims of gun crime. But what they don't say anywhere in that article is that blacks commit the majority of gun crime. In fact, 53% of gun crime is committed by blacks, despite the fact that they only represent 13% of the population. So I had to sort through all this stuff to get you guys the facts on gun crime, and I had to go 3 pages deep to get to any FBI statistics. So that just shows you these companies are trying to bury the truth, to push their agenda. And I have to ask you, if the elites, if these billionaires want you disarmed, you should be wanting to buy more firearms. And that should be a clue to everybody that this agenda for gun control is not about saving lives or helping Americans. It's about control of Americans. So let's talk about these stats. So 74% of gun murders in the U.S. were committed by illegal guns. These are guns just like this guy in Texas, people who are committing crimes with guns that they shouldn't have been allowed to get a hold of. People who have histories of domestic violence cannot buy guns, just like the guy in Texas. People who have dishonorable discharges cannot legally buy guns. So, illegal guns. These are guns obtained through a third party illegally, where they lied on the background check, or where people went out and bought a gun on the street. And that represents 74% of gun crimes in America. Illegal guns. In fact, when you look at gun crime as a whole, gun crime is actually secondary to non-gun violence. So, When you talk about people who are killed with billy clubs, with knives, with, broken bottles, somebody punches somebody too hard and they die, that is the majority of crimes in the U.S. And no gun control would prevent that. In fact, when you look at countries that have put in place gun controls, very strict gun controls, these crimes have gone skyrocketing. And they were always the majority of murders were those committed without guns. We've seen huge stabbing sprees in the U.S. where people couldn't get guns. And those things are multiplied in places like Europe where they have stricter gun laws. But even that narrative of the mainstream media, when they say, oh, look at Europe, it's so much better, is false. When you look at legal gun ownership compared to illegal gun ownership, the countries with the highest legal gun ownership are the U.S. and Canada. But second to the U.S. and Canada is Europe. See, the only difference between Europe and the U.S. and Canada is the U.S. and Canada have a higher illegal gun ownership to gun ownership. And when you look at that spread, Europe is actually ticking upward as they have invited in third worlders. They have let these people come in their countries and run amok. And with that illegal infiltration of their borders come more drugs, more guns. And we've seen an uptick in gun crime in Europe. And crime in general is up in Europe. When you look at the distribution of illegal guns to legal guns, those countries with the highest illegal gun to legal gun ratio are all in our hemisphere. Countries like Mexico, countries like El Salvador, countries like Colombia. I have lived in those countries. I've lived in El Salvador, which has the highest murder rate in the world. And most of those murders are committed with machetes or other means of killing people. And those countries are horrific. In fact, those countries passed all the policies the left want to push here in America. They made guns pretty much impossible to get. They victimized the law-abiding people and turned them into cowards living behind 10-foot-high fences with barbed wire. Meanwhile, they empowered the gangsters and the criminals. They passed all these social and socialist programs that the left wants here in America that empowered criminals, destroyed the middle class, limited all upward mobility, ran off industry, and these countries are now hell on earth because of it. Now, that aside, I want to talk about a couple more things. So, as I said before, most mass shootings are committed by African Americans, and these are shootings where 3 or more people have been shot. In Chicago, there are 600 murders so far this year. In fact, the cops in Chicago confiscate an illegal firearm every 70 minutes. That's about 18 illegal firearms they take off the street every day. Those firearms, most of them came from illegally smuggled firearms or firearms stolen from police depots. So, they confiscate all the guns and then the criminals get access to all those guns. How does that make sense? And let's talk about one more thing. When you talk about the majority of gun crimes, when you talk about 52% of gun crimes committed by African Americans, that's not a Republican demographic, especially when you look at the poverty rates in those communities and the other demographics involved, young males. These are not Republican demographics. It's not people like me or responsible NRA gun owners going out committing the majority of the crimes. In fact, when you look at the crime statistics for people who have been incarcerated for felonies, it's about 80% Democrat, registered Democrats. So when you talk about political registration for felony convicts, it's about 80% Democrat. And I'm sure there's some independents in there too. So we need to get these facts out there. We need to show people that the mainstream media narrative must be shut down, and that is completely wrong. And they're pushing an agenda. Let's face it, they're pushing an agenda for the elites to shut down people who might oppose their monopoly on power. That's what it's always been about. That's what it's still about. If they really want gun control in America, if you want me to turn in my firearms, I've said this before, you go disarm all those people in Chicago. You Democrats disarm all these inner city communities that have such violent crime rate, because you don't care about victims. You don't care about people who are hurt by gun crime. If you did, you would have done something a long time ago in those cities which you've controlled for 30, 40 years now. So do something, Democrats. Put your money where your mouth is. Then maybe we'll talk about some sensible gun control. Until then, shut it. You've been red-pilled.